Everybody, Dr. Ben here with Alpha Sports and with Josh Godinez again, our movement man. He's going to be moving for us and demonstrating how exactly we'll be moving through those 3 hip foundational fundamental movements, or as Kelly Starrett likes to call them, the archetypes. So we're going to go through and look at how we stabilize through those, where we need to be stable, where we need to be mobile, and that's going to translate into what we like to work on, which is that efficient mechanical endurance, which then translates into that peak athletic performance that we're always talking about. At least here at Alpha we are. So the first thing that we're going to do today is we're going to go in through a squat. So go ahead and just squat for me real quick, Josh. All right, so when we're in this position, one of the things that I'm looking at as a practitioner is I'm trying to see where is his knees driving, where are his toes pointed, what does his torso look like compared to the angle of his shins. So I want the angle of his torso and the angle of his shins to be pretty parallel. There's a bunch of different numbers out there. I personally look more for symmetry than I do anything else, because it's when we get into asymmetry is when we start to have compensations. Those compensations tend to be what leads us into pain. Come on up out of that real quick. I'm not going to make you just sit down there the whole time. Also, sidebar, pain is not an indicator that you are damaged or that you are injured. There's a difference between being hurt and being injured, and we'll actually be going over that in a video later on. So one of the main things that Josh and I were just talking about is when we're getting into that squat and what we're wanting to do and what we're wanting to see out of that is the ability to stay stable and mobile through different things. So we want to be mobile through our ankles. We want to be stable through our knees. We want to be mobile through our hips. We've got to have a lot of flexion in our ankles. We've got to have a lot of flexion in our hips to be able to get into that position. We want to be able to drive power out of that position, which is why I love seeing his toes going forward, because when we're in those athletic stances or when we are doing an athletic event, we're not taking off with our legs super externally rotated. It's not how we drive power. When I'm contacting somebody in football and I start to drive them, I'm driving in almost a lunge or a running position, and I want to be able to produce power in that same position, which means I'm not going to I discourage our athletes from training in that position at the same time, depending on their sport and also depending on their anatomy. Some people's anatomy just doesn't let them get as close as other people's. Now, the variations aren't as wide as what we thought they were. The differences aren't as many. There's a lot fewer differences than what we realized based off the research that's been coming out in the last couple of years. So one of the other things that we're going to be looking into is a lunge. So go ahead and get into a lunge for me real quick. So a lunge is huge, especially with a bunch of the athletes that I get to personally work with, which are track and field athletes, because this translates straight directly into a run. So it's hip flexion on one side, hip extension on the other side. It's the ability for them to stay stable through their midline, rotationally, anti-rotationally, so that they can drive power through their hips. One thing that we preach on a lot at Alpha is the ability to breathe. So I like putting people in this position and then working pow-off presses. The ability to work that anti-rotation at the same time as working this fundamental foundational movement, and in kind of increasing that efficient mechanical endurance so that they can perform to the best of their ability or that peak athletic performance. This is what's going to help them translate all of this stability, all of this muscle control is going to turn into power when they're on the track and they're having to run, and that's running in any sport, which most sports have running in. So I would argue that this is a pretty important one. The ability to be able to drive with one foot while the other foot is off the ground, but to still stay stable, is highly sought after. So that's one of the reasons that we really like to get into the lunge position and make sure that it is sound. Not just with rotation, not just with core stability, but the ability to drive power and to transfer those muscles who are no longer having to stabilize into just producing power and speed and agility. So one of the last movements that we're going to look at is that pistol squat. So go ahead and get into just a pistol for me. Perfect. And he doesn't have to do a single leg pistol. Really what we're looking at when we're checking this out is his ability for his ankles to have a ton of flexion, his hips to have a ton of flexion, and to see those shin and torso angle to mirror each other again. That's what we're really looking at, and that's what I look at when I'm assessing our athletes. We don't go straight into the pistol. It's one of the last things that we work, especially here at Alpha Sports, because I want to see his ability to squat first. This is going to highlight more issues than what the squat is going to give me. Squat is easier. Lunge is what people think is easier. I would argue that the squat is the easiest, the lunge is harder, and the pistol is the hardest when it comes to our hip foundational fundamental movements. So this is where we kind of pick this one apart. We want to be able to see, like, does he have the core stability to actually stay in that position for the 10 breaths that we were talking about before, those 90% 1 rep max breaths. Does he have the dorsiflexion that he needs to actually get into that position without falling backwards? Which he does. He looks great. So pretty. All right, come on up out of it. This is going to highlight more of those issues that we typically see when we are really good at masking our imbalances or muscle control when it comes to our squats. We train squats so much that we can do a pretty good job about being able to hide and mask our, not dysfunctions, but our lack of mobility or our lack of stability in certain joints and through certain movements. So this is really going to highlight that for us, and this is one of the reasons that I really like looking into this. And then it also translates into, like we're talking about before, being able to drive, produce power, produce speed. So that's the reason that we want to make sure that all of these foundational fundamental movements are owned by you, the athlete, so that you can go out and become an athlete.